everybody. It's Tony. I'm back with another amazing episode of Women In. Let me tell you what you're listening to, and then you're going to get to meet my fabulous guest this week. Women In is a podcast that celebrates women in all walks of life and the individuals in their lives who are lifting them up. You're going to hear from a super cool person in my life today and other individuals throughout the series of this podcast, and they're going to share their stories to inspire others to support all the extraordinary women around them. This is a space to be disruptive, forward-thinking, and change agents for humankind. It is uncensored, fun, and curiosity-driven. This is what I'm passionate about, breaking down the barriers for my kids' generation. It's equal parts about my guests and the places we came into each other's lives, whether it be the Kalamazoo Wings, Mindfulness Elevated, Tony Will Coaching, or you happen to be in my family and friends circle. My guest today, and once you hear the bio, you're going to figure out how we met. Tammy Dahms is a woman in sports, motherhood, volunteerism, and sisterhood. A 2010 graduate from Elizabethtown College with a bachelor's degree in business administration and theater performance. Her career in professional sports is an unexpected but beloved tangent from the start of her career in nonprofit children's theater. Tammy is currently the Vice President of Corporate Partnerships for Santander Arena, Santander Performing Arts Center, and the ECHL Reading Royals, entering her 13th season with the company. Outside of work, she serves as a secretary for Breast Cancer Support Services of Berks County and is on the Research and Development Committee for the Greater Reading Chambers Alliance Women to Women program. She is happily married to her husband, Brandon, of 8 years, and has two beautiful and spirited daughters, Grace and Brooke. Hi, Tammy. Welcome.
Hello. How are you?
Good. I'm fantastic. So we will talk about how we met in a minute, which is obviously through sports, but just when I get to read bios, because I generally don't dive into the bios of really anybody unless I'm since I launched this podcast, but I'm reading your bio right before we got on here, and I'm like, God, we have so much more in common than just the onset of being women in sports. So we'll start there. How did we meet?
So I tried to think back to the first time we actually had a conversation. So I think the first time we actually talked was here when you came to visit last year in person. But, going to league meetings and things like that, to your point, I saw you at meetings. I saw you kind of leading the charge with the women in sports kind of stuff at meetings. And I was like, this is a woman I want to align with. Like, she's doing the things that I want to be part of. And so I was kind of paying attention to you before you got here, and not in a weird way. But I was like, when we found out you guys were coming for a visit, I told our GM, I was like, I need to meet her. I want to be in her radar and in her circle. So I think the first time we met was here in person. So I love that you travel and meet other teams and get to see everybody. So I think that's the first time we actually had a conversation just last year.
Yeah. And there's so many good stories about coming out to Reading. Number one, so I used to have this fear. I'm much better now, but I do travel a lot. And one of my leadership pillars is go to the experts. So whenever, whether we play, because there's 29 teams now in the ECHL. And so whenever we play a team that I haven't been to their community, I go. Because even though I've been doing this for 10 years, I'm always like, they're doing things that are awesome and I can learn from.
Right.
And so that's been one of my leadership pillars that I hold tried and true. And so, so I'm coming to Reading and I take my first flight and then I'm trying to check in for my second flight and it won't let me. And I'm like, well, this is bizarre. So I call and I find out they're like, oh, you just do it at the airport. I'm like, well, what am I flying in on? Because, this is 2024 here. And so come to find out I'm on this 8-seater, not like a helicopter, but a puddle jumper plane. I'm like, I might die.
Yeah.
Over to Reading. I'm like, what is this?
Where was that flight from?
Boy, I gotta remember. So I was at Duluth.
Okay. Wow.
And so
I'm with you.
I was terrified. I'm like, I might die. But it was a clear night. And I got to see it was a beautiful flight, all the lights. It was actually awesome. So, overcoming fears. But the other thing I loved about Reading, it's a smaller town. And similar to Kalamazoo, but the type of events you guys get at Santander are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, and we went to a comedy show because we played you. I think we had 3 games there.
Yeah.
And we went to one of the comedy shows. I was just so impressed at the community, what you all do at the arena, at the theater, and then your role in that is in all those spaces. It's not just hockey, but you're involved in the other events and such. So you wear a lot of hats.
I do. And I've worn a lot of hats over my time here. So, it's been an interesting kind of path because I started part-time in the box office. And I did that for a couple of months and got to the point where, full disclosure, I was coming off my parents' insurance. I needed a full-time gig. Like I was just turning a corner of my life where I was like, listen, this is what I want to do, but I can't keep doing it part-time. And the GM at the time kind of threw me a bone. He's like, here's some group sales stuff. Go ahead and, we used to have a great group sales program. See if you can resurrect it. And I was okay. He's like, we'll pay you commissions. It'll be great. And I was like, all right, I'll try. So basically built it from scratch because the program that existed was gone. Like it was, the contacts that I had were long gone and no longer viable. Rebuilt that. And then ultimately, like I left. I was like, they still didn't have anything full time for me. So I left. I ended up in higher ed for a second, which I don't know why I ended up there. I was a secretary for a local college for all of 6 weeks before he called me back and said, our box office manager is leaving. So I have a full time spot for you. And that's when I came back full time and haven't been able to get rid of me since.
So you came back full time as a box office manager.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And I maintained the group sales piece of things. And for a while, I did both of those. And at some point, shortly after David, our current GM, came on board, it got to the point where group sales had grown so much that he was like, either we need somebody to focus full time on this. And if that's you, great. But I also need a full-time box office. Like it can't be both anymore. And so, he gave me the choice to stay in the box office or move to sales. And so I decided to move to sales. And that's kind of where it landed. And I think finally, 10 years later, I'm finally out of ticketing, which is great. Yeah, so it's been an interesting path through all of that.
Yeah. So tell me why I'm interested in this because I've always been in sales in my entire career too. What's interesting though is I never really, sales and leadership, because I've been managing people since the beginning of my career. And leading teams, but sales has always been a part of the teams I'm leading. And so I never really thought of it as sales, which is kind of funny, like when I think about 22 or 23-year-old Tony. But that's what I was doing because I was so passionate about what I was selling that it didn't feel like I was selling. And one of the things I say about sports or entertainment is like, this is sexy. Like this is fun stuff to sell. So tell me what made you decide to go into sales? Is it because it's kind of, I don't want to call it an easy sale, but it's sexier or appealing or what was it about it?
I think so. I mean, the group sales piece for me, like there's a lot of like, the warm and fuzzy stuff to that because you help a family do a group outing for the holidays, right? And then you get a thank you card afterwards. It says like, Grandmom and Grandpa came from out of town. We had a really great experience, or you get a basketball group out for the Harlem Globetrotters and, the kids make you a handwritten card and send that in the next day, or you get a voicemail, whatever. And so you get to be kind of part of those experiences. So to me, that was the easy part. Like I spend all of my extra income on going to concerts and events. So it's an easy flip for me to be like, I love doing this. Let me tell you why you should love doing this. So yeah, to that point, it's way easy. But then when I started to shift into corporate sales, the gentleman that was in this role before me kept pulling me in a little bit more and more. And he's like, I think you should do this. I think you'd like it. And I couldn't see the same thread into corporate, right? I was like, it's not warm and fuzzy. It's business. I don't understand. I just can't sink my teeth into that. And after a while, I started to he kept getting me involved a little more. And I started to realize that my impact could be a lot longer lasting than just one concert or one show for those businesses, for their employees, for, the community at large. So that was kind of the way I could flip that and be like, okay, it's not just getting them out for one great experience. It's getting, helping grow their business year round. It's helping their employees come out to an event on their own time and seeing their company advertised and being like, this is awesome. I have pride in my company for supporting my hometown, that kind of thing. So that was I needed to find that thread. in corporate. But yes, to your point, if I didn't believe in all of that, I've said before, I don't know that I could do car insurance or, or any of that other sales, printers. I just don't think that's my world, but maybe I'm wrong. One day I'll find the thread, but for now I really enjoy the entertainment piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, and you see, this is what's interesting. You like going to concerts and events. I don't. Like, I don't dislike it. It's not a pull I have.
Sure.
So, in the decade I've been with Wings Event Center, I've gone to three events outside of hockey.
Yeah.
Now, we're not getting the events that you are.
Sure.
Because and I'm interested kind of, I know you don't do the booking and David does, but
Yeah.
I'm interested in how these acts come through Reading, because Kalamazoo is, so what we're talking about for the novices in terms of when we book events or concerts, like Kalamazoo sits right between Chicago and Detroit. So we're kind of a stopover, but we're a smaller venue. So we're not as big as, obviously in Detroit or Grand Rapids. So we're not going to be the main event. We're going to get small. We're never going to get a Disney on Ice. We're never going to get a Garth Brooks. We're not big enough for that. But you guys, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a little bit off the beaten path too.
Yeah.
So kind of explain, because you, was it John Mullally is who was the comedian when we were playing you all, and it was in between some games, and so we went. We wouldn't have gotten that in Kalamazoo. So I'm interested, and you have but you could probably name drop some much bigger names than that. I didn't look at your website, but how do you all get that? Like, what is the attraction to Santander?
Yeah, so we actually just talked about this with our local chamber. They're doing a feature on the success that we've had this last year, and to the point, like, we talked a lot about David's work. Our general manager, David Farrar, does all our booking. His work is sales too, right? He has to sell to these tours that Reading is the place to go, not just because they're going to make good money, they're going to sell a lot of tickets, but because they're going to get really great service while they're here, right? So the best thing that we can offer for a tour, being a smaller venue in a, I wouldn't even say a secondary city, I'd say tertiary city stop for these tours, is that they're going to show up, they're going to have an easy day. Our crew's going to know what they're doing. We're going to have everything set from the riders when they get here, that sort of thing. So he has to sell that. And then, once he gets the tours here, it's up to the rest of the team to hold up our end of the bargain, right? And to show up with our A game. And so, it's not just about selling tickets, though obviously that's a big piece of it. And so some of that, tours will call and say, hey, we're touring, we're routing, through this area, and we've got an open date. Can we stop over? But I've watched David do it the other way. We had a Kevin Hart date a few years back that he was playing in Philly. I might have the details of this not exactly right, but he was supposed to be playing in Philly, which is where I think he's from. So that was nearly sold out. And then like 3 days later, he had a show in New York, but it was like, he wasn't going to go home. He was going to, like, what does he do with those extra 3 days? Philly was already sold out. So, and David knew it. So he called the promoter and was like, you want to do an extra date? And brought him in. And so that's some of it. Other times he knows, through the industry of working with these promoters over and over that, they've come through with this artist, and in casual conversation, he says, well, my next tour out is so-and-so. And, he lays the groundwork for, well, give us a call if you're going to be in this area, if we can route you through to Reading. But I mean, it's a lot of sales on his end, because Reading isn't on most tours' brains, right? It's Philly, Chicago, New York, that sort of thing. So he's doing a lot of pounding the pavements and picking up the phone.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, and it's obvious to me in your bio, like, you're passionate about women and the work that I'm doing, and you do it in your community. So, and you get two different vantage points, because you were in the box office, and then you're in the event side and on the hockey side. Yep. So when you think about women in these various different spaces that you occupied in your career, what do you note about the women in sports difference between, let's say, women in events or entertainment?
Good question. I think it's interesting for me because most of the women at least that I know that are in sports, got there because they had a passion for sports as a start. And mine started the other way. Mine started with entertainment. So, that's kind of the difference that I see, is that a lot of the younger girls younger women in our office now for the Royals got here because they love hockey, or they were soccer players in college, or, and they wanted to stay in the sports world. Whereas on the entertainment side, I think it's more, where I came from, as far as like wanting to be part of that fun and, the entertainment, the concerts, the live events. But I think the challenges are kind of all the same, right? I think it's universal across the board. I think in sports, maybe it's a little bit more pronounced, but I don't know. Since I've started here, I would say we've probably tripled the number of women that work on both sides of things here, which is impressive and something I'm really proud of our team for making happen.
Yeah, it's from my chair and what I do. You can tell of the 29 teams who are really, and not, you hire the right person, right?
Right.
It's not like you guys are out there saying, we're hiring women only, but you hire the right person. And but there are teams who embrace the diversity piece, the equity and inclusion. And, I don't know if I don't want to use the word risky to hire women, because it's not,
right.
But it's not the norm, right? It's disruptive. And which is crazy to even say, because I don't know. Which is why I started to do this work. I was like,
Sure.
I was sitting in the board of governors meeting, and I'm like, oh my God, like there's like 2 women.
Yeah.
And there's some work to be done here. And I noted that about 7 years ago. And so I started kind of beating that drum. You hit on something that I want to dive into a little more. It is more pronounced in sports. And what you're alluding to or saying is the barriers we run into as women.
Yep.
If you could define that, because I have a hard time sometimes not articulating it, but the what I coin is, well, not just me, but the unconscious bias I think that we run into.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's those pieces of, because to your point, there's a lot of meetings where I sit in and I'm the only woman at the table, right, on leadership and that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of times where, ideas are flowing and, I'm at the table, I'm part of the conversation. And then it comes to like, well, who's going to do the follow-up? Tammy, can you handle that? Or who's going to, can you set that meeting for me? Or can you get our schedules together and set that meeting? And it's not a knock on anybody, right? I will be the first to say that my team here, the men in this office absolutely respect the work that we do as women. But it is an implicit bias. It is, I don't think they realize that they're doing it. And so I have made a conscious effort of like being the first one to say that, like, oh, it was okay, you think we need to meet on this? Why don't you go ahead and put it on our calendars? And trying to not be, maybe I just said that a little more biting than I mean it, but trying to flip that. So it's things like that. It's also, putting, I think there's a perception that women serve certain roles versus, and so the forward facing, the, front and center customer service piece or the entertainment piece versus like the decision maker piece, my favorite TikTok that I saw recently is, no, this is outside of sports, but it makes this point perfect. It's in retail. She's talking to a customer. The customer's mad at her, like doesn't like the answer that she's getting. And he says, let me talk to your manager. And she says, okay. And she like sinks down behind the desk, turns around, stands back up. and it's her because it was always her. But that guest was not giving her the credit for being the woman in charge or the person in charge of that space. And so it's that kind of piece that I see a lot that, again, is not, I don't think anybody's intentional thought. It's just something kind of ingrained. And those are the pieces that we try to break down.
Oh my gosh. When you were sharing that TikTok, I lived that, but I lived it like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
in banking when I was there, and I would have people, because banking, that's no joke to work in leadership in banking, because you're dealing with people's finances. And
Sure.
this was of the time when overdrafts weren't as regulated, and so every time someone wanted to talk to a manager, it was because their account was overdrawn and they're getting daily overdraft fees. And I'm glad that's all been like much more tightened up and regulated, because it needed to be. But they would
Right.
be screaming at me like, "Let me see the manager," and I'm like, "I am the manager," and they're like, "No, you're not," because I was young
Right.
and I was a woman. And
Hmm.
at the time, I didn't, that wasn't registering to me. But now, as you share that, I'm like, oh my God, I've lived that
Yeah.
so many times. What a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not biting, it's just a reality,
Right.
right? It's just a reality that, and that's what, when I started this podcast, it was like women in dot, dot, dot. And I put the dots for a reason, because I could sit here and do a podcast on women in sports and we could talk, but it's so much more than that. And you opened your bio with what you're a woman in, and I loved this, and motherhood and sisterhood and community and sports. And so talk to me about, is that the complete way you fill in those three dots?
Yeah.
And what do you hope to see for your daughters, because you've got two young girls that you're leading, you're raising up in all this, so,
Yeah.
and you get this great vantage point of being a minority in sports.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot in that, but
Yeah, no, I think I know where you're going here. I think, yes, that does fill in that dot, dot, dot for me, because, and I was trying to be really concerted on that, and intentional, because, what are my days like? Right. And yes, I'm a wife too, right? I have a fantastic husband, but, that's more of a partnership than anything. And so, we're in that together. Whereas, to your point about what am I trying to do for my daughters, when I was I was pregnant with my first daughter. You'll love this story. We didn't know the sex of the baby, and we didn't want to find out until delivery. And so, I think we're probably 7, 8 months into this pregnancy, and in my hormonal mess of things, I don't know what was going on in the world, what news I was watching. I have no idea, but my husband comes home one day and I'm sitting on the couch crying. And he's like, "What is wrong?" And I was like, "I don't know if this is a girl, how I'm going to help her understand how unfair things are for her, and how to help her like have power in her femininity and her place in this world." And in the moment, it was way more dramatic and ridiculous. This is way more articulate than it was in that moment.
I totally get it.
But and I didn't even know that she was a girl, but and actually at the time I was convinced it was a boy, but I was just beside myself. And so I think that since becoming a mom and finding out that it was a girl, and then the world blessed me with a second one, I think it's really kind of shifted my energy of, I've always been passionate about uplifting other women, but now having two young girls, I'm like, no, I need to, and this is why your podcast resonates with me, is like, we need to make changes for our kids' generations. And so I don't want my daughter to be pregnant saying, how do I explain this to her? And so I think that's kind of been my focus is, making sure that they see that women can do really powerful things and women have a place at the table. And, hopefully by the time they get into their professional careers, this isn't even a conversation we have anymore.
Yeah. Did you feel like, so it's funny because part of what brought the idea up to me for the podcast, because I need another project, like I need a hole in my head, but I'm just so passionate about this and I want to bring, these conversations to light. But when I was coming of age in the 80s, I was born in the late 70s, and then, I'm growing up in the 80s, and then I'm finish up high school in the mid to late 90s, and then I'm in college. I graduate college in 2001, and I'm in the workforce, and I didn't really feel or see any of this, or I was just oblivious. I think that's probably part of it. But my mom worked, and she was a school teacher, but she was in a job where it was mainly women, right? Because of school teachers, and I always like to point out in this podcast that I love men too. I've been married to 3 of them, for Christ's sakes. Like, I love men, but it could be men in dot, 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 because men can be in female dominated fields too, right? Like teachers, nurses, that change, right?
My husband's a teacher, so yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we have it on both sides.
Yeah, you totally know. And so it's like I didn't feel it coming of age. It wasn't until I became a mom. I ended up in a career that same story as you. I had no desire to be in sports. I could give a fuck. Like it wasn't.
Yep.
I mean, I got a call that said I applied for a job in a high-end fashion boutique inside the Radisson, who owned Greenleaf Hospitality Group, and they were like, "Yeah, you're overqualified." I'm like, "I know. I want something where I'm overqualified. I don't need to be the leader of something. I'm okay with that. I want to step back." And they were like, "No, we got something that's better for you, we think, and that's the Kalamazoo Wings." And I said, "The hockey team?" And they were like, "Yeah." And I said, "That's still around?"
Oh gosh.
This is me on the phone with HR, and they're like, "Yeah." And I said, "I don't know shit about hockey." I mean,
Yeah.
I've been to a few games growing up, and I thought, I didn't even know they're like, "That's why we want you to come here."
Yeah.
And then they told me what the pay was.
You were like,
And Tammy and I are laughing because if you know anything about minor league sports, it is not a lucrative industry, right? It is not at all. And so, my point in telling this whole story, obviously I said yes. I never follow the money. I never have. I do it because I love the community. I love a good challenge. It was, irregardless of my gender, didn't even give it a thought when I walked through those doors 10
Sure.
years ago. And here we are,
Yeah.
right? And here we are. And so how I got on this freaking soapbox, I don't know, but it really is. I know what it is. It's about like not seeing that as I was coming of age. So I was going to ask you if you saw that as you were coming of age. Because you got your degree in business administration, just like I did. Was this on your radar, this passion for lifting women up and feminism of sorts, if you carry that identity? And
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. So in college, I was in an all-female a cappella group. We did a lot of work for some local domestic violence shelters and women's shelters and things like that. So it was always kind of in my background in some form or fashion. And interestingly enough, so Elizabethtown College, their whole motto, their slogan, their thing is educate for service, and they're very big into volunteerism, and you get credit for volunteering and things like that. And when I was in college, I did some of it as part of the extracurriculars I was in, but I wasn't super passionate at the time. I just kind of did it because my friends were there, and it was that's what we were doing on this random Tuesday morning. Graduating and then going into the theater world is mostly women. Obviously there are men are more dominant in production side of things. Obviously actors too, but a lot of what runs that is women. And so I didn't really see it in that part of things until I really got here and then started to shift into the sports side of things. So it's as I've gotten older, I've started to see it a little bit more. Like you said, you're kind of oblivious to it. And that's where my passion for volunteering and stuff has come. And so I think it's funny that like E-Town instilled that in me, but it didn't really take until later.
yeah, well, it's a gift of motherhood, right? Or a gift of, and even if I have some podcast guests on that don't have children, men or women, and it's just the different paths we all take, but it opens our eyes up in different ways. That's why I love getting older. Like I'm not afraid of that whenever these milestone birthdays come, and I just know I'm collecting more wisdom.
Yeah.
So, and I'm gonna live to 100.
Well, unless you already said the F word, and fewer fucks to give, which is nice.
Well, I'm a swearer.
I know. Like, it's just as you get older, the things that you cared about, like there are situations that come up for me now where I'm like, 23-year-old me would have had a meltdown about this, but 36-year-old me is like, it's not worth my energy. Like either I do it or I don't do it, or you do it or you don't do it. And we move on because there's more important things to focus our energy on.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about, as we're talking about your upbringing and these things, who are the women that shaped you? Who are the important women in your life? And now I ask this, and I always tell my guests now, careful how you answer this, because if you forget someone and they listen to this podcast, I've had this happen to some of my guests. So, and I take no responsibility in that, but I just like to forewarn. So
give that disclaimer. Yeah. My world is filled with women. So I think that's kind of why it naturally, lends me to support them. So we've talked about my daughters. That's kind of the motivation for everything. I have two sisters, Bonnie and Cindy, that are, very much part of why I do some of the things that I do, and they're wonderful supporters of what I do. My sisters are always, like, growing up performing and all of that, they were always the loudest in the crowd, embarrassing, but loud, and supportive. So they've always been there to lift me up and support me. My mom, she passed in 2022. The biggest thing I learned from my mother is to slow down and take time to talk to people. We spoke a lot after she passed. Everybody shares a lot of stories about each other, and I did a lot of listening at that time. And what I realized is the things that she did for me, which was, in middle school and high school when things were really hard, and you sit up at the kitchen table until 2 a.m. talking through this, that, and the other thing that's really hard. I learned that she did that with everyone. And I didn't realize that was the case, so around her passing, I learned that her best friends would basically tell the same story, and in a different way about different things, not about teenage drama, but about, financial hardships or marriage problems or things like that. And my mom was always kind of the one to say, like, I'll put a pot of coffee on, come on over. And she would just sit and talk with people. And, I think it's where I got gift of gab from. But also, you realize what that listening does for people. Even if she didn't have anything, profound to offer, it was just that sounding board to be. So my mom is definitely a big part of that. And then all of my circles are women. My college roommates and I are still, we have a group chat thread that's constant. We make goals to see each other at least 6 times a year, and we hit that every year because we live in different places and all have kids and families. And then locally, I stumbled into a group of women here that there's about 12, 13 of us that just support the heck out of each other. If there's something that needs, a social push, if there's somebody going through a hard time, it is like, send the bat signal, everyone's there, or everyone that can be there is there, and they're bringing love from those that couldn't. So I've kind of found an accidental, I didn't go seeking them. They kind of found me, and, I'm lucky enough that they've let me stay there. So, it's just, you find your group of people, your tribe, and my whole goal right now is just to make sure I'm giving to them what they've given to me.
Yeah, wow, you just have a great, like, well, yeah, you said it in your bio, sisterhood.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
whether it's your two sisters, literally,
Yeah, truly.
or your friends, who I love this goal of seeing each other 6 times a year. That's
Yeah.
that's a lot.
It
That's
is.
fantastic.
Yep. And so it's not always all 5 of us. Sometimes it's, we set the date and it's going to work for everybody, and, kids get sick or this happens or that happens. But, we make this goal that we've seen each other, enough times so that we spend, and sometimes it's just the girls. Sometimes it's the girls and the husbands. Sometimes it is everybody brunch at my house and it is sheer chaos, but we just sit in the middle of the chaos with some mimosas and look around and be like, could you have imagined this 15 years ago? Because I couldn't.
Oh, and it just keeps getting better, honestly.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of different identities, and just at work alone, you have a lot of different roles, because it's not just hockey for you. And so, your wife and your mom and your friend and your sister. Okay, so how do you balance all this? And I call it a fallacy, work-life balance, because I'm not good at it. But and I don't know. I don't know that I believe in this, what the buzzword of work-life balance, because I think it's kind of pop culture-y, and what all
Yeah.
that bullshit. But what do you think? And that's just my 2 cents. I love to hear same opinions or even differing, because I love to hear how women do this.
Yeah. I think for me, it's not balance every day, every week, every month, right? You're not in true balance forever. I think for me, it's the give and take. It's seeing the give and take and recognizing it for what it is. So, kind of on the counter of this, my husband is a high school teacher. He's also a high school football coach for one of the best teams in our state. It is, again, I'm not a sports person, so I married a football coach. I don't know what I was doing. So I got myself into a world I didn't understand at the time. Like I literally, when we first started dating and I realized how important this whole world was to him, I was Googling like, how do wives survive football season? And as we've had kids, it's gotten harder. So right now I'm in a season, truly his football season, where, we joke that I'm a single mom because he's got practice every night of the week. And so he's feeling it the other way because he doesn't see the girls. He's barely home enough to put them to bed. He's with them right now. It's a Saturday morning. He's hanging out with them in the morning, but he's got football tonight. He's got football tomorrow. It's tough. So this is a period of time that's really hard for him. It's really hard for me in other ways, but I also have a lot of family time right now, at least with my girls. Come January, that flips and he's home more and I'm in the thick of hockey season and I'm not home as much. So for me, it's really balancing that expectation and understanding that not every day is going to look the same and you make it up where you can. The other piece is I give myself hard lines during the weeks that, outside of football season, that I'm not going to be home 2 nights a week. If that means I have to work a concert or a game, those are my 2 nights that I'm not home. So I'm not doing any networking events. I'm not grabbing drinks with a girlfriend after work. I'm going home to be with my kids. If there's no games, there's no events. Okay, then I have time to make for those happy hours, those networking events, those, going, getting together with the roommates, that kind of thing. And I try to make a rule so that it's not hard and fast. I have to be flexible, but I try to be aware of kind of this week versus next week. And it's going to balance, I'm going to see the other side of this at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. Like I live and die by my calendar. It's color coded. Mm-hmm. It's got, K-Wings in purple, mindfulness elevated blue, my family stuff in yellow. And, it takes a freaking village. I have a lot of help. But it does. I think you raised such a good point. It does balance out. And, there's certain things for me that are non-negotiables to help me stay solid up here. And I'm pointing to my head for anyone not watching the YouTube video, but like working out. And like, that's a non-negotiable for me. And so it happens. I love Orange Theory. And that's my thing the last 3 years. Before that, it was endurance sports like marathons and triathlons and all that stuff. But I always had like just something to kind of keep me grounded. And then I call it set the table for the day. So basically I do a bunch of these like health and wellness things like work out, meditate, eat a healthy breakfast. I read 30 minutes. And then my whole day at that point can go great or it can go sideways shitty. But at least I can, I took that time for me at the top. And you're doing very similar, like it's the having drinks with friends or networking or whatever gives you energy. Like I call it energy gain versus those energy draining things that come in our lives. And I tend to look at that, and that's what I'm hearing from you, just that type of balance. Yeah. Not necessarily saying I'm working 8 hours a day. I'm at the gym for 60 minutes. I'm spending 2 hours with my husband. I think that's how we define things, and we can define them all differently. Right. So
yeah. It's just knowing that like, while work is dominating this week, family will dominate next week, and maybe it's not this week, maybe it's next month, maybe it's, 6 months from now, but it's just knowing that we can kind of make those shifts. This past summer, we made kind of a goal of like, I told my husband at the beginning of the summer, I said, I don't want to say no to things because we're tired or because the house is a mess and we need to clean it. If the girls want to go to the pool in the afternoon, we'll figure it out. It's a pain in the ass. It takes a lot of work. We're going to go. You know what I mean? So that way, and we'll leave the mess to later, or we can do laundry tomorrow, or, whatever that thing was. And so that summer setup prepared me for the fall, where it's a lot less of the fun with the girls, to be able to say like, we did all that. That's good. And we will have time for that again soon.
Yeah. No, I mean, if we base things off of, I just said this to Josh this morning, if we base things off of not being tired, When is that going to be?
Wouldn't do anything.
Yeah. And B, this is a big one. I continue that I don't feel like it. Because if I didn't do what I didn't feel like, I would not do 90% of my day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true.
Right? Like, so when I catch myself and I don't feel like it, you know what I do now is I go do the thing I don't feel like doing because the reward in that is so much sweeter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like I don't feel like, and I rarely say this, I don't feel like working out, but if I did, I'm like, it's not never like I walk out of the gym regretting it. Like, fuck, I shouldn't have done
Yeah.
that.
I need that. If you can implant that to me, I would take that motivation. That's the one piece I can't quite get on. When you said you do all these things in the morning, what time do you wake up to accomplish all of that?
6:15.
But see, but your kids,
Right. Now,
that's my challenge because I can't predict what time my kids are going to wake up.
yes. Now, when I was in your stage, because I'm about 10, well, I'm 10 years older than you, but I had kids at, younger. I was in my early 20s and I was done by the time I was 28. But I used to get up earlier when they were younger and it required me to. So I used to be, it depends on the stage of life, but sometimes 4:30,
Yeah.
5. I mean, when I was training for Ironmans, they were young.
Yeah.
And I had to your point, I figured it out and I made it work.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes, and a lot of times for me too, it's like, it's okay to get off track to then get back on track. And the best example I can give to that is when I broke my ankle this year. And I love working out and it is like my thing to keep me sane. And I had to figure out a whole different way with a broken ankle, non-weight bearing, to like keep my sanity. And it was the greatest gift. I didn't feel like that at the time, but there's just and so yeah, I could do a whole podcast on that stuff, but I just figure it out like you're doing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something, and this is totally, Tammy and I did not talk about this, and I did not know this about her till we started talking on this podcast. So I'm going to tread into a little bit sensitive territory, I think, but only because of where I'm at in life right now. So my mom has very late stage Alzheimer's. We're about ready to walk into hospice care. She broke her hip and has been in the hospital. She's still in the hospital right now, and hospice care is coming in once she comes home. And so we're moving towards to the end. And you've lost your mom, and you were young. You were in your 20s when you lost your mom. So
30s.
30, yeah. So tell me, like, how was that? I mean, this is something I haven't talked about on any of my podcasts, not about my mom, but about like someone who's lost their mom.
Yeah.
And you've gone through something that I have yet to go through. So I want to hear your wisdom.
Yeah. Well, not to throw you a curveball on this. So I lost my father in 2011. Wow. And so I would probably, knowing what I know about your situation with your mom, probably relate that closer because my dad was very sick for a long time. He ended up with end stage renal failure. He had kidney failure when I was in high school. Long story short, got a transplant, gave him 7 more years of life, which was great, but it was still different, right? Like all of that world is different. And that kidney started to fail too. And at that point, my parents had me at 42 and 47. So I'm very, Wow. So it's different speeds here, but
that's interesting in and of itself.
Yeah. My siblings, my sister is 7 years older than me. My other sister is 17 years older than me. And my brother's 19 years older than me.
So can I ask what?
Sorry, tangent.
No, I know, but I find this fascinating. Were you on purpose or were you accident?
Oh no.
Okay.
No. Well, both me and my sister Cindy were both not intentional. The first two that are 2 years apart, that was intentional.
Okay.
But yeah, we were
Kudos
both.
to them. I'm 46. I can't imagine having a baby.
Yep.
Oh my God, I'm tired. Talk about being tired. Okay, now I just had to ask.
So it is a unique experience because I lost my dad. I guess I would have been 20 something, 24. When I lost my dad. Now, like I said, that was a long time. We had a lot of time to understand that he wasn't going to be around forever. My mom passed rather suddenly. She went into the hospital. She was at my daughter's birthday party and she had like a little cold. And right after that, everyone seemed to have the stomach bug, right? And so she had the stomach bug and she watched my daughter a couple days a week for me at the time. So she literally had my daughter Wednesday, and passed the following Wednesday. So she had what we thought was the stomach bug that had been going around. And when I finally went and dropped Grace off with her Wednesday morning, and she basically told me she hadn't eaten anything since the party on Saturday. And I was like, okay, you call me, but if I'm coming back at 1, if you haven't been able to keep food down, we're going to the emergency room or urgent care or something. So I took her to urgent care. Urgent care looked at her and said, nope, you're going to the ER. And so we went to the ER and discovered that she had some issues with her, essentially her intestines were not working anymore. So very long story short, she was in the hospital for about a week, and they basically told us like there was no recovery from that. So it was hard. That was a lot harder than my dad, only because we didn't have the preparation. She was literally watching my daughter, and then she was gone.
I was going to ask you that, because both ways are obviously very
Sure.
hard, and they were a year apart, right? Like
The loss?
the loss, yeah.
No, many years. My father passed in 2011, my mom 2022.
Oh, okay. I heard 2012 earlier, so that's why
I'm
I
sorry.
thought you were in your 20s. No,
No, that's okay.
That's probably me and my hearing issues.
That's okay.
That makes more sense. Okay. So, the difference between losing someone quickly and watching them draw out,
Yeah.
and the anticipatory grief versus sudden grief.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've been through both.
Yep.
Which one do you think is harder?
Good question. I think they were different. I don't know if I'd say one is harder than the other. They were just different. With my mom, I felt I felt numb for a couple days. Like my husband literally had to nudge me to eat. Like he would literally deliver food and be like, you need to eat. Like I was just totally unaware of the world. You know what I mean? For a couple days. With my dad, it almost got, and this sounds awful, I don't mean it to sound this way, I almost wanted the relief for him.
Yes.
Yes. Like I wanted, so when he passed, yes, we were sad. Yes, all of the things that I wouldn't get to do with him went through my brain. But there was a relief in, he was no longer in pain. He was no longer worried. I mean, he spent most of the end of his life in hospitals and doctor's appointments and attached to a dialysis machine. Like that's not a way to live, not for that man, And so it was really, that was hard. And so when he finally passed, there was the immediate grief. And then there was the like, okay, this is no longer over our heads. It's not, he's no longer in pain. He's no longer suffering. The other piece to that is my mom was no longer suffering. This is something I'm really seeing, in hindsight, that the 10 years my mom after my dad passed was probably the healthiest my mother ever was, the happiest, like not that she wasn't happily married,
Sure.
but the most self-fulfilling happiness, right? She did the things she wanted to do. She ate the food she wanted to eat. She could travel if she wanted to. She wasn't bogged down by his doctor schedule, his medications, his, later stages of life, his wheelchair, his, you know what I mean? Like you could see the relief in her in the later part of her life. And so that is kind of the weird piece of it that I think was a little bit of a struggle of like, wow, mom is so happy. But it was because that burden was no longer on her.
I totally get it, because my dad is 81. He's been taking care of my mom, and I live half hour away. So I'm part of this, but it is emotionally draining.
Yeah.
And to watching her in and out of the hospital, just what you described. I mean, different because of the different illnesses your dad
Sure.
had versus what my mom has. But I sit there and think, this is not how I want my end to be. If I get to write my story. And so I'm obsessed all things brain, and I love to learn about those things. But and just being able to relate and talk to someone about this, that you've been through it, and there's no easier way, whether it's long drawn out illness or sudden. It's both. It's different hards,
Yeah.
And so what would your advice be to someone like me or someone that that is going to go through? We're all going to listen. We should outlive our parents. I want to state the obvious.
Right.
How awful if they outlived their child. Like no,
Right.
it's the like how life should operate. So what would your advice be to me and the others that are about ready to maybe go through this?
I think just kind of, this sounds hard to do, but if I could have known what life would be without her, or without him, my dad did. This was the gift my dad gave us because he knew his time. He basically told us on the last day he left the hospital and came home for hospice. He's like, I'm done. It was right around Christmas time. We got him home for Christmas. We did Christmas with him. He passed on the 29th. And so we did Christmas, and we tried to make Christmas as much of a normal Christmas as we could. But then the days after that, he asked for time with each of us to give us messages, to tell us what he wants for our lives, to tell us what he's most proud of us for, and things like that. I'm going to try not to get emotional on that one.
I know I'm feeling it too.
So that was a gift that we had with him. With my mom, that's the thing that I wish I would have sat down with her, not knowing that I didn't have that much time with her. You know what I mean? So I never got there was all the stuff with my first daughter I got to ask her about. And now I have two, and my mom had two with a similar age. So there's these things that I wish I could have asked her. Like, Mom, did I do this as a kid? Like, or how did you manage the two of them going at it like this, And so my advice would be to like sit down and be like, what are the things you wish you could ask them when they're gone? Go ask them now. Like,
Wow.
And that's the difference that I saw with those two is like, my dad had the luxury to give us that gift. My sister and her now husband had been together for years, with the agreement they were never going to get married. And all my sister wanted was to get married, but she decided she loved this man. It was okay. She would be okay not getting married as long as we agreed we'd be together forever. And right before he passed, my now brother-in-law asked my father's permission. And so my dad, which he was supposed to keep it a secret, then told everybody. But everybody but my sister. So it was a surprise to her. But there was so my brother-in-law gave that gift back to my dad, where my dad knew that we would be set, right? Like that my sister was set, but that he would help, and he would, fill in the gaps with my brother, for that father figure for me and my other sister. And so things like that, where it's like, it's a really hard practice to do, to sit and imagine your life without them truly. But if you can sit in that for a minute and sit in that like really uncomfortable space, you can really figure out what you need to gain from them now.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful. See, and this is why I don't like to script most of my podcasts.
Yeah.
I just say, here's some questions that I probably won't ask you. And because this is the stuff right here, like such great advice. And I still have time to be able to have that conversation with my mom. And I love that. So thank you for the willingness to talk about a topic that I know isn't easy. And I didn't even know any of this about you before we got on. So we're just two women in sports.
Yeah. But there's so much else that goes into a day. That's the reality of it is like, there's so much more to just the 9 to 5, right?
Oh,
which
God.
is a joke if we work 9 to 5, but
especially what we do. Yeah. So, one of my biggest things in passions is reading. I read my age every year. And so this year I'm 46, as I said, but I'll probably end up reading 50 plus books.
Yeah.
And so I want to know what you're reading right now.
So I'm supposed to say that whatever book that we're reading for book club, but I'm not. I can't lie, I'm not. So the last book that I just read The Housemaid.
I read that.
I can't think of her name, Frida something.
Frida McFadden.
Yeah, so I just read that, which I couldn't put down. I know that it's a series, so I have to get the next one. But right now, I don't even know the name of it. It is because The Housemaid was so heavy.
Yeah.
I needed something really light and airy. So it's a book about a summer romance. I don't even know what the heck it's called. It's the Summer of Broken Rules, maybe. I don't know. It's almost like YA. It's super simple, but I needed something like light. Yeah. Yeah.
When I put a list together every year and I put it out to the world, like here's what I read, because people ask, and it's a
Yeah.
mix of like of all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I mean, I'm reading. I don't know if you ever watched True Blood on HBO, but the Sookie Stackhouse vampire.
Yeah.
So I have it's like 10 books that I bought the whole series, and so this year I've been slowly just reading those in between
Yeah.
other books I read.
I love
So
that.
yeah, I mean it's like I laugh at some of it because I said to my husband, we were driving home last night, I said, "Do you believe that vampires are real?" And
Yeah.
he's like, "You're crazy," and I'm like, "I know."
Oh, I loved True Blood. I loved it. And
Yeah.
I did read some of the books afterwards, but I don't think I stuck with it.
Yeah, I love a good goal, so I'm like I'm gonna eventually. I didn't. My goal isn't to read all of 10 of that this year, but
Yeah.
which I don't think what month. Yeah, there's no way I'll get through all of them at the pace.
I don't know
I'm
how you do
reading.
it. I don't know how you do it. I couldn't read that. I love to read, but it by the time I sit down to do it, I'm like, you know what? Bed sounds a lot better.
Yeah, so the practical how is, and you know this because you and I've talked about it in the groups for the women and stuff or presentations you've sat in that I've given, but I have a 25-minute drive to work or 30-minute drive to the gym, so my car is a rolling university, so there's that, and I listen to Audible, but then I also like I have 2 books going at home, 2 or 3, and I have 1 at work, so when I'm walking, I walk and read, or
How
I
do you
lay
read
in bed.
multiples? I would confuse it all.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
brain is impressive.
Well, and it's so after watching my mom go through, like, it's so important to me to just keep this, this is a
Keep it
mainframe,
working.
baby.
Yeah,
So,
I gotcha.
so okay, so oh my gosh, this has been so good. I want to know, okay, one more thing. What have you changed your mind about? This is always like, and I always like to try and ask this question because speaking of the brain, there's neuroplasticity. It's real. You can change your mind and change your lifestyle or change. Like I always talk about how I quit drinking, and it wasn't like it was like a light switch. This took a lot of work, and so, but the brain is powerful. It can do a lot of things. So, and maybe it's not something big like that. Maybe it's like you didn't like tomatoes and now you do. I don't know. What have you changed your mind about?
So when you sent these kind of an advanced questions, this was one that really stumped me for a while, and I was like, what have I like? I feel like I'm a pretty constant person, but I think I kind of took this on the more abstract, and I've changed my mind about gossip,
Me too.
and feeding into it or being fed by it. It's something that I don't want this to make it sound like I'm a terrible person. Like I used to love some drama. I used to love, and we joke like where my office is at work. I can see the main door. I can see who's coming and going. I know who my boss has had meetings with. I know when his door is closed. I know, who's made appearances more than usual today. Like I need to know things, but not in the same sense, not in the same, like, I know everything, let me tell you about it. It's more of like, for me, it's just a comfort of like, just being aware of what's going on. But, I've started to realize how much drama comes with that, and unnecessary drama. I've watched people I had a conversation with somebody the other day that said, I'm just really surprised by, it was a work issue. And he's like, I'm really surprised that this is a problem now. And I was like, but are you this is, it wasn't feeding into the gossip to be like, oh yeah, you're right. I so-and-so did this yesterday. And but instead I was like, no, but are you surprised? Cause I think, we've seen this movie, we know how this goes. So let's just move on and be better with it. And, control how you handle this and not how the other person does. And, and that was kind of where I realized, like, instead of feeding into that gossip, because it would have only just bred more negativity and made that person more upset, broken down that relationship more. And it was like, no, it has no place. And it also cuts down my, reliability and my integrity to sit there and feed into it. In the same way, like hearing gossip too, to take it in and be like, oh, now I'm mad at that person, or now this is annoying. Instead to just be like, sounds like their problem, and just move on and, not give that fuel to the fire, I guess.
Yeah. I have 2 points on this. I too have been working on this. And actually I think I've moved I move through it, you know, however long it takes, but I totally agree. I'm reading a book called Reality-Based Leadership. I'll probably finish it today. And it talks about this. It talks about drama. It really is good. And I know you would love this book. So
Yeah.
Reality-Based Leadership by Cy Wakeman.
Okay.
And that talks about this topic. So I want to tell you that. And the second thing is I was voted in high school class gossip. So I am immortalized in the Vicksburg High School 1996 yearbook with that title. And I used to be proud of that shit.
Awesome.
What? Changed my mind. Now that was 18-year-old Tony, and
Sure.
It's been almost 30 years. But
Yeah.
And I will say, like, if I want to connect this back to, it's not just women, but women tend to get caught up in this more so, I would think, than I see men do. Like, anyway, so it's just an area as we work to improve on this. We're role modeling such great behavior for our kids because, oh my gosh, my 17-year-old who's a senior in high school, I'm like, Chloe, that stuff is not important. Like trying to talk to the younger me there. And
Are you parenting her or yourself? Right.
Yeah.
And to be clear, because in case somebody's listening to this is like, Tammy, that's bullshit. I'm not great at it. I'm still, it's a work in progress.
She's going to read the book, everyone. She's going to read the book.
I am going to read I wrote it down, but it's just something that like I've noticed, and maybe this is just age. It's not, going back to like, caring a little bit less. It's, I don't know, maybe it's just age, but I just see the negativity that spawns from it. And I'm like, but who has time for that? Like, I don't have time for that. And, going back to my daughters, you can really, this was the biggest mirror for me. Grace is such a sponge of energy. So, and my husband pointed this out when she was an infant, when she wouldn't calm down, he's like, she's feeding on your energy. You're upset, you're anxious, and I'm like, no. And at the time I couldn't see it. But as she's gotten older and, she's 5, but she can articulate feelings a little bit more. And you can see her using language that she's heard me use to describe things. And I'm like, do you know what that means? And she doesn't, but she's saying these words and then they're becoming ingrained in her. And so I'm like, oh. And so it's just a really interesting mirror that you see things and you're like, oh, and you're just much more aware of what you're putting out into the universe when it's being spit back out at you by a 3-foot blonde.
Amen.
Mini me. And you're like, darn.
It's like Chloe, the apple didn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah.
So, such a great point. Oh, this conversation, Tammy, was phenomenal. If people want to connect with you, where do they find you?
LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So, I love to connect with new people. It is part of my everyday. So I would love to connect with anybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for asking me.
Great conversation, getting to know each other even better. I love it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, if you guys want to find me, I can be found on LinkedIn and Facebook at Tony Lentini Will. I'm on Instagram at I'm Tony Will. And then the various websites of the businesses that I operate, kwings.com, mindfulnesselevated.com, and TonyWillCoaching.com. Until next time.